G.LOC Air Battle, although not officially mentioned, is essentially a sequel to Afterburner 2, and what a poor effort it is. The original Afterburner and Afterburner 2 were both fast, exciting shooters. G.LOC on the other hand is slow, ugly, cumbersome, and not a patch on Afterburner at all in the technical marvel or oral delight. But enough bitching, what's the game about? So you take control of an experimental aircraft in a mission to eliminate enemy planes. During the game, the player is attacked from front and back. The game is played most of the time in the first person perspective. However, once locked by an enemy missile, the perspective changes to the third person behind the player's plane to allow the player to perform evasive maneuvers. The game was released in 3 arcade cabinet versions: a standard stand-up version, a sit-down version, and a G.LOC sit-down version, the R360 cabinet. The R360 gives the game a more dynamic feel as the cabinet responds to the pilot's actions, spinning the player in a full gyroscopic 360 degrees, somewhat removing the limited path the plane could move in the standard stand-up and sit-down versions. The Amstrad CPC is a system known for slow, unplayable ports, so it has to be said that this version of G.LOC is not that bad. Not all good, however. The actual hit area on the screen could be bigger. There's very little movement, meaning that even though there are many enemies on screen, it's pretty difficult to hit them since they never come near the target area, and you can't really move far enough to target them. More often than not, the C64 ports are better than the likes of the ZX Spectrum or Amstrad CPC, but in G.LOC's case, this most certainly is not how it is. Playing G.LOC on the Commodore 64 can only be described as mind-numbingly dull. The game is awful in all respects. It looks bad, plays bad, and sounds bad. It's so bad, it's pretty much impossible to know if you're even shooting anything down. surprisingly not that bad. The pace is fast, the controls are responsive. The bad news is that the ZX Spectrum port lacks movement just like the CPC version, meaning the enemy spends most of their time out of the target area. The Mega Drive makes a very good attempt at bringing the arcade to the home. Featuring the arcade introduction and playing better than any other home port, you'd be forgiven in thinking that this is an excellent game. Unfortunately, it's simply not, because the original arcade is pretty poor. Still, the Mega Drive version does allow you to select missions, plus it has a few out-of-cockpit viewed missions unlike the arcade game. Differing slightly to the arcade version, this Master System port lays out the levels in a type of mission-based scenario. I quite like this idea, as it breaks up the levels, giving an impression of more of a fuller game, plus this version has boss battles. Playability wise, it's not too bad. The controls are responsive enough, and for the Master System, it looks pretty good too. Instead of going for the straight Master System port, the Game Gear version is a whole new game that allows you to power up your jet fighter at the end of each level. To buy parts for your jet fighter, you use points that you have gained by shooting down the enemy as currency. Being a Sega game with a shop, it goes without saying that the background music for this section is taken from Fantasy Zone. While this port is playable, it does suffer from a lack of vertical movement, which I can't help but think if it had more, the game would have been 10 times more enjoyable. As it is, we have a fairly nice arcade style shooter for the Game Gear. Starting off with a very good rendition of the arcade's presentation, you'd be easily fooled into thinking you were about to play a pretty good arcade port. Sadly, the actual game is bloody awful. Very low frame rates, as is the case with many arcade ports, terrible graphics including planes that look like grey lines, and landscape with no real detail. Add in the poor controls and we have one stinker of a game that hides behind a nice presentation screen.